But let's, of course, start with this big story that's come in from the United States, where the United Nations Security Council has lifted sanctions on the Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa. The Council voted in favor of a US resolution to lift the sanctions ahead of the Syrian leader's visit to the White House next week. Now, the resolution was approved by 14 members of the Council, while China abstained. The vote has now delisted Ahmed al-Sharaa and his Interior Minister Anas Hassan Khattab from the ISIL and the al-Qaeda sanctions list.
Colleagues, with the adoption of this text, the Council is sending a strong political signal that recognizes Syria is in a new era since Assad and his associates were toppled in December 2024. There is a new Syrian government in place, led by President Ahmed al-Sharaa, that is working hard to fulfill its commitments on countering terrorism and narcotics, on eliminating any remnants of chemical weapons, and promoting regional security and stability, as well as an inclusive, Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process.
Now, the formal lifting of the sanctions is largely symbolic, as they had been waived off every time Ahmed al-Sharaa had needed to travel outside of Syria in his role as the country's leader. An assets freeze and also an arms embargo will also be lifted. Now, formerly affiliated with the al-Qaeda, Ahmed al-Sharaa's group, the HTS, was delisted as a terror network by Washington as recently as July. And since taking charge in Damascus, Syria's new leaders has sought to break from the violent extremist past and present a more moderate image to foreign powers. The move has been lauded by Syria, with Foreign Minister Asad al-Shabani writing on X, and I quote him here: "Syria expresses its appreciation to the United States and to the friendly nations for their support of Syria and its people." The President Donald Trump will be hosting Ahmed al-Sharaa for talks on the 10th of November, and Damascus has said that the Syrian leader will discuss issues that include the lifting of the remaining sanctions, reconstruction and counterterrorism during the visit. Now, Trump has also expressed hope that Syria will join other Arab nations that have normalized ties with the State of Israel under the so-called Abraham Accords. Now, the United States is reportedly preparing to establish a military presence at an airbase in Damascus. A report citing multiple sources have said that this will help enable a security pact that the Trump administration is brokering between Syria and Israel. The reports have further said that the base sits at the gateway of the parts of southern Syria that are expected to make up a demilitarized zone as part of a non-aggression pact between Syria and Israel. Now, though it will be Ahmed al-Sharaa's first visit to Washington, it will also be his second to the United States after a landmark trip in September, where he'd become the first Syrian president in decades to address the United Nations General Assembly in New York. All right, now to give us more updates on this, we're joined in this broadcast by our correspondent Susan Teherani, who's joining us live from New York. Susan, this is an interesting visit by Ahmed al-Sharaa, who will be hosted at the White House. Tell us more as to how this realignment is taking place, where Syria appears to be now back in the good books of the United States.
Yeah, well, the United States was the pen holder at the UN Security Council for that draft resolution to be passed, and the U.S. side really worked tirelessly to try to get everyone on board. The resolution to lift the UN Security Council sanctions passed, 14 in favor. China abstained because it had some concerns about security and whatnot. As you mentioned, it is largely symbolic, also because it does bring Syria back into the international realm. It shows a willingness by the international community to welcome Syria back into the international community after Bashar al-Assad. However, the United States has very stringent sanctions still imposed against Syria under the Caesars Act, which was drafted back in 2019. In order for those sanctions to be lifted and for the United States to do business with Syria one-on-one, then Congress would have to get involved and lift those sanctions. This does seem like a pathway for that. and for that to sort of get revised or lifted completely. But as of now, the Caesar Act is still in place when it comes to the United States. However, it was very important because, as you mentioned, the lifting of these sanctions come as Ahmed al-Sharaa is visiting the White House for the first time, meeting President Trump. And it is expected that President Trump is going to ask Ahmed al-Sharaa to work as part of a coalition, an international coalition, to combat and defeat ISIL, ISIS, and al-Qaeda.
Thank you very much indeed, Susan Tehrani, for joining us with those updates then.